Hello, everyone. We're trying this again. All right. Um, it's been a while since I've been on the VC. This is a Spin Zone video. I've got like a dozen albums to show. Um, and I will get to that as quickly as I can. First of all, I'm hoping everything, the settings on this phone have been set correctly now to not flip the image of the album cover the way the last video was. Like this one. See, as I'm holding this up, it looks flipped, but after a couple of video tests, the final product will show it the correct way. So this is the first album, Yellow Submarine by the Beatles. And I just dropped my glasses. Okay, here we go. No do-overs. Yellow Submarine by the Beatles. Funny story about this album. I got an Instagram challenge from Emma over at 8 Vinyl Low last week sometime, I think. And it was one of those color challenges, you know, where you pull albums out of your collection with a certain color on them. So she gave me yellow. So it was one of the endless 12-hour shifts that I was working last week. And I was home, and after dinner, I had a minute, so I was pulling albums. Emma had given me the color yellow. And my wife chimed in and said, "Oh, show Yellow Submarine." And I said, "I don't have that one, babe." And she's like, "What?" I said, "Sorry, I don't have the Yellow Submarine album." She goes, "How's that possible? You have all the Beatles albums, don't you?" And I'm like, "No." I have most of the Beatles albums, but I don't have every single one. So she took it upon herself to order this for me, and she got this for me. So I have her to thank, and I have Emma to thank for bringing this up because I got a free album out of the deal. So, because that's just how my wife is. She's great. This is from the 2012 remasters. Sounds great. On very heavy vinyl, very well made, and as you can see, the first side is pretty much Beatles songs, and the second side is instrumental, orchestral pieces of music that were in the Yellow Submarine film. So a couple of repeats from other albums, like the title track Yellow Submarine that was originally on Revolver, All You Need Is Love, which was a single, Only Northern Song, All Together Now, Hey Bulldog, and It's All Too Much make up the Beatles' musical contributions. And then George Martin did the film score, which was on side 2, which was perfectly pleasant to listen to. So glad to add this to my collection. Of course, it's the Beatles. You know, you can't go wrong with just about any Beatles album, can you? All right. I will try to get through these as quickly as I can. We're 3.5 minutes in. I had one day off in the last like 2.5 weeks, and I took full advantage of that time off, and I spun a bunch of records. This was the first one that day. The Mason Williams phonograph record. Of course, it's the one that has Classical Gas on it, which is one of my favorite songs from the 60s. You know, it's a great guitar instrumental. So we love that song. And I found this at Goodwill. It's a first pressing, I think, from the Dead Wax. It's like an early pressing, judging by the label too. So for like $3. So, and it's in mint condition, so I couldn't say no. Then from the original collection, I just felt like spinning So by Peter Gabriel. Was just in the mood to hear this album. So not every single thing that I play or that shows up here on the Spin Zone is going to be stuff that I've never heard before or that I bought recently. Bought this album in 1986 when it was new at Record Town in Ford City Mall. I remember going there. I bought this album and I bought The Bridge by Billy Joel. And it was the first time in my life I ever bought more than one album at a time. For a poor suburban kid, I thought I was throwing around fat stacks of cash, walking up there with 2 albums. But this is probably Peter Gabriel's most accessible album. I think it's certainly his biggest hit. Of course, Sledgehammer is on this. Big Time is on this. In Your Eyes, you know, from the famous scene in Say Anything. Just front to back, just a classic album. And I just felt like playing it. So that's what I did. Then after that, I played Albert Collins, Don't Lose Your Cool. Another addition to my collection of Albert Collins albums. This is just a smoking album, even though his band's name is the Icebreakers and his album titles usually deal with the theme of cool or cold or ice. His playing is red hot on this album. Let me tell you, it is awesome. Love, love, love this album. Don't Lose Your Cool by Albert Collins. I dig it. And then this was one that had been on my want list for quite a while. It's a triple album. Jimmy Page and the Black Crowes, Live at the Greek. This was recently reissued, I think last year or the year before. And my wife surprised me with this on my birthday, so I got this a couple months ago. And of course, being a triple album, it kind of gave me a little pause because I wanted to listen to it all the way through. So of course, on that day off, I had enough time. And this took up a good chunk of the afternoon, being 3 albums, a 3-record set. And it's basically, see if I can get this without any glare so you can see the song titles. It's basically a Led Zeppelin live album. You know, with, and Chris Robinson does a pretty fair job of not imitating Robert Plant, but, you know, sounding enough like him to kind of make you feel like you're actually listening to a Led Zeppelin show. And of course, Jimmy Page takes the lead with the guitar, and it's just amazing. Just a smoking hot concert. Well worth the money, well worth the time listening. Jimmy Page and the Black Crowes, Live at the Greek. Awesome addition to your Led Zeppelin collection, if you so choose. Then, saw John from the Digital Gramophone. Played this album. I think he posted it on Instagram. And actually, I think he talked about this in a video for last year's Record Store Day, because that's when this record came out. And he talked it up enough to make me want to get it too. So I did. I bought it last year and sat in the crate for a year until I saw it again on his Instagram, and it reminded me that I had it. So I pulled it out and played it, and it's wonderful. It's a this is a reissue. I think this came out in like 1969. Something like that. Is that why they reissued it for Record Store Day for like the 50th anniversary? But it's here's all of the artists on here. Carla Thomas and Rufus Thomas handle the majority. I'll show you the gatefold here. Handle the majority of the vocal duties. But if you like classic soul, you know, from the late 60s, you know, that classic stack sound, this is definitely a great album to get. I don't know if this got a wide release beyond Record Store Day, but the sound on this really popped out of my speakers, especially the drum sound. The drum sound, and it seemed like there was tambourine on almost every track. And I don't know if it's just because it was coming out of the speaker that I was closest to, but it seemed like I was able to hear like the drums and the tambourine really sharply and crisply in these songs. So great album to have. I'll definitely be revisiting this at some point in the future. It's not going to sit for another year before I play it again. Then we're just trucking along here. Herb Alpert's Rise. This was a VCLT from Steve at Value Vinyl, who was doing his big vinyl giveaway some months ago. And I saw him show this. It's a very, very nice condition copy of this album. So you could make picks and ask him for what you wanted. So this was one of the records that I asked for. And of course, the title track was a #1 hit for Herb Alpert in 1979. Here's the set list. The song 1980, I sounded very familiar to me too. I don't know if that was a single release or not, but I know I've heard that song before. And of course, this is a gold stamp promo, just as a bonus. So this was sort of a comeback for Herb Alpert, I think, in 79, because I know he had a big hit with Rise. Like I say, it went to #1. And it's just a great album. Kind of chill, kind of, you know, it's not quite the Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass Band, but his horn playing kind of echoes that throughout the album. And it's got a disco beat to it. I'm not going to lie to you, but I like disco. It's fine. And coming out roughly that same time period, 1978, is City to City by Jerry Rafferty. This is another one that I picked up sometime last year, and I was flipping through my crate, and I felt like I needed to hear Baker Street. That's the big hit off of this album. And so I decided to pull this album, and I played it. I'd never listened to this album all the way through before. The only songs I was familiar with, like I said, was Baker Street and the song Right Down the Line, which was another, not as big of a hit as Baker Street, but a hit for him. And the rest of this album is really good. I was quite impressed. Jerry Rafferty had a lot more in him than just a hit single or two. So this is pretty much a great pop rock album. And I've heard a lot of people speak very highly of this. So that was one of the reasons why I picked it up. But basically it's because I wanted to have Baker Street, because the 45 that I had cracked. So I bought this. I found it cheap. So City to City, that's a great one. Whew, my arms are getting tired holding up all these records. This is the new album from Coldplay called Everyday Life. Like I said, my wife and my daughter are big Coldplay fans. And when this album came out, the printing on this is kind of, you need to get the light to see all the writing on here. When this album came out, I automatically ordered it for them and played it. So I liked this album a little bit more than some of the other Coldplay albums I've heard. It seemed like this one has a little bit more of a varied sound to it. It wasn't just the same old thing over and over and over. Yeah, I was able to take Chris Martin's vocals a lot easier on this album too for some reason. I don't know why. But yeah, I'm just trying to hold this so you can see the title without too much glare. Yeah, I like Coldplay good enough. I'll listen to this with them. That's not a big deal. Now, this next one was one that I found because of my buddy Bill over at the Vinylverse had sent me a notice of this album existence, and it is the complete Plantation recordings of Muddy Waters, as you can see here. This is an Analog Productions record. And you can see here it's QRP pressing, and these are supposed to be numbered copies, but they put the number on the bag, which I guess it's fine. I guess they just didn't want to stick it on the album sleeve itself. But this is I'll just take it out of the bag so you can see it clearer. This is a piece of history for any blues fan, any hardcore blues fan. I would say this is an essential record to have, because this is a reissue of the field recordings that Alan Lomax did for the Library of Congress in 1941-42. And he comes across Muddy Waters, who plays, his guitar and sings. There's little snippets of interview in between, and it's amazing. I can't say enough good about it. I'll show you the gatefold. There's a lot of good information in here. This is the original release of the 78 that the Library of Congress put out, and you can see the jacket here it's not the exact same lettering on it, but they did their best to reproduce it. There's Muddy Waters right there, as you can see, sitting there with Henry Son Sims, the very, very young Muddy Waters with the guitar. And then, of course, on this side, you can see the car that Alan Lomax had all of his recording equipment in. Weighed like 300 pounds. That was cutting edge technology back in 1941, probably. But there's Alan Lomax there at the microphone. Essential music. This is the stuff that so many forms of music were built on that we know and love today. So it's pricey. I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you. This was like a $60 record. It's a 2-record set, but to me, it's so worth it. The sound quality is just as good as the Folk Singer album that I've talked up here before. It feels like you're sitting on the porch with Muddy Waters and he's playing you tunes on his guitar and singing for you. It's that good. So, like I said, it's expensive, but worth it. And at least worth it to me. So this is actually the gem of all of these albums that I'm showing you today. This would be the one that I would probably recommend the highest out of all of them. And let's give you a closer look at the picture of Muddy. There's also some inserts in here that gives you more information about these recordings, and there's a couple of pictures in there too, but it's really all about the music. It's acoustic guitar and singing. Fantastic stuff. So if like I said, if you're a big blues fan like I am, a big Muddy Waters fan, this is like musical history. And I'm always been a fan of Analog Productions. They do quality work. They put out a quality product. So this gets my highest recommendation out of all of these albums that I'm showing you today. The Complete Plantation Recordings. Get it. Then these last couple, I did a couple of random pulls out of my record crate. I was just sitting there with my wife trying to figure out what to play next, and she said, just move your hand back and forth, over the records in your crate. She told me where to stop. I pulled it and played it. So Jefferson Starship's Nuclear Furniture was the first album that I randomly pulled. You can see all of the song titles and everything is on the edge of the album. No Way Out was the hit single off of this, and Laying It on the Line. Those were the two songs that I was most familiar with off of this. And this album came out like in 1984, I think. Very dated sounding, very, very 80s. This is very much an 80s album. It's got the big drums. You know, the big guitars, the big choruses, everything is just big 80s. This album screams out big 80s. Which is, it was the sound of the time. So it's very much of its time. Still enjoyable to listen. I remember hearing No Way Out a lot on the radio and seeing the video a lot on MTV back in the day. So it's fine. I dig this album. I like Jefferson Starship. They're okay. They're fine by me. Then another one that was not a random pull. I wanted to hear this one. This is, of course, the album called Showdown with Albert Collins, Robert Cray, and Johnny Copeland. And just like the other Albert Collins album that I showed earlier, the guitars on this album are fire. Total fire. So if you want Chicago blues album with smoking hot guitar that doesn't let up from the beginning to the end, you need to get this album, Showdown. Can't recommend this one enough highly either. It's not as historic as the Plantation recordings, but man, it was a great album to put on. So for all you blues people out there, if you don't already own this album, get it. It shouldn't be that hard to track down. It shouldn't be that expensive. Or at least it wasn't for me. And the last one. Trying to do this as quickly as I can. This was a random pull also. Chicago 10. This was VCLT from Mike Guitar Player 07. There's the back. It's got the chocolate bar cover. And If You Leave Me Now was the monster hit off of this album. It's really the only song I recognized on this album. I didn't really recognize anything else. But just like all the other Chicago albums with Terry Kath, which I think are the first 11, I like them a lot. After Terry Kath died, and kind of move away from Chicago to a great degree. But this still falls in that era where he was still with the band, and this is just an enjoyable album. You know, it's not mind-blowing, it's not terrible. It's great to put on and just enjoy when don't really want anything super challenging to listen to. So there you go. However many albums that was, I think it was 12 or 13. Hoping to do another video a little bit later in the week. And I hope when I watch this video back, everything looks correct. Because holding these up and looking at them in reverse, it's kind of weirds me out. But I'm hoping the final product will be fine. All right, guys, that's going to be it for me. Going to try to be around a lot more. My work schedule has sort of returned to normal. And I'm playing more records here lately too, which is a help. It's a help for my sanity too. It's like therapy. All right, I'm going to cut it off here. 23.5 minutes, not too bad. Everybody take care. Peace. Keep yourself safe out there. And we'll get through this sooner or later, this whole coronavirus, COVID-19 thing. So just be careful. Keep yourself safe. I'll see you again soon.